Hello everyone, this is Larry the Lone Wolf here, and this is going to be the start of a brand new podcast hosted by yours truly called Past, Present, Play. Now, for today, this one's actually more of a prelude to the podcast compared to it being a real true episode, just to really kind of test out how the podcast is going to play out. But I want to first address my audience and say thank you for all the years of support that you have been showing to me for my YouTube channel and for my Twitch and everything. I'm super grateful to have the best audience ever. And as my reward to you, this podcast is sponsored by Uber Eats. You can actually try it out for your first time with the code below. So be sure to use that code to get $20 off your first order. If you're unfamiliar with Uber Eats is basically a food delivery service that sees Uber drivers delivering food from any restaurant that you can order from straight to your door. So if you wish to try it out, try the promo code in the description below and you get $20 off your first order. With that being said, let's carry on with the podcast. So as I said before, Past, Present, and Play is a brand new podcast I'm going to be starting, and even though this is the prelude, this is going to I'm only going to be solo for just this one, and sooner or later I'm going to be having more people joining the podcast. Like I plan on having my friend Sean, who you probably know as Nightbound92 or Dark Vice from the Retro Raiders, and then hopefully at some point Nostradante might come on. It's very difficult for him to be a full-time member of the podcast, but keep in mind that this podcast is not going to be just solely me. It's going to be a two-man podcast, so that's for the future. This edition is a prelude so that you know exactly what to expect. If you do wish to know what this podcast is going to be about, it's going to be about various video games from, well, the past and the present as well. There's going to be various video game topics that we're going to talk about. There's going to be hot takes that I think are going to be worth going into. Some of us will also be given our first impressions or reviews of certain games that we may have talked about, or maybe even have a little retrospective of games that we've played in the past and whatnot. And I can definitely say that there's a ton of games from my youth that I could definitely talk about on this podcast, but we're not going to talk about that in this edition. We're going to be waiting until a future episode where I do have my friends on here where we can all talk about it together. For this episode, I'm going to get straight to the chase. There's actually two things that I'm going to discuss on this prelude, mainly because it's something that I have a lot of thoughts on for the both of them. And the second one is actually one of the biggest news, at least for me personally, only because I'm a huge fan of this franchise, and I'm sure you are as well, and you probably know what I'm talking about. But as of the recording of this podcast, the PlayStation Showcase had happened. It's very late reaction too, because I only saw it many hours later due to being caught up at work, but I managed to see what was announced over there. And I'm not talking about Spider-Man 2, although it was really cool seeing Spider-Man 2. That's a game that I already knew was going to be coming. And one confession I do have is that I never played the original Spider-Man. Well, I did play the original Spider-Man, but I never beat it. So I got to make it my goal to finish that game and then eventually tackle Miles Morales so that I can get caught up with the story. But Spider-Man 2 definitely looks really good. I can definitely say that for sure. There's another game that I'm actually definitely more interested in wanting to talk about. But we'll get to that in a second. First off, let's start off by talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This, a lot of you who probably follow me on my Twitch and whatnot have seen me live streaming this game. It's even appearing on my channel as well in the form of like 1 hour part playthroughs and stuff, which I'm also glad that there are some of my audiences that are enjoying it and stuff and seeing the adventure. But I have so many things to say about Tears of the Kingdom. This isn't going to be a full-fledged review because I have not finished the game yet, and to be honest, I'm barely even a quarter of a way through the game. I've only completed the Rito Village part, and I'm still in the middle of the Gerudo Village stuff. But so I'm only going to be going off of what I've been seeing so far. So consider it more of a first impressions. But all I gotta say is that Nintendo really, really surprised me with this game. Like, first of all, Breath of the Wild, I don't think anyone's going to deny is one of the best games ever made. That game was so immersive, and even though some people may not have liked the cel-shaded graphics, I think it worked for the hardware, and I think it had a very interesting art style too. Most people, I guess, were just disappointed at the fact that it didn't have realistic graphics, but for me, Zelda doesn't need to be doesn't need to look realistic in order for it to be a great game. Like, the fact that it has a unique art style that most people can remember is something that I personally can appreciate. And Breath of the Wild, you also gotta take this into account too, was the first time that Nintendo had ever made a straight up open world Zelda game. You know, most of the older Zelda games, while the worlds were immersive, it was like you couldn't really free roam or do anything like open-ended, you know what I'm saying? Like, even though you could still adventure around, it definitely didn't give you that level of freedom like Breath of the Wild did. So Breath of the Wild took it to the extreme, and the only reason why Nintendo made that game to begin with is because a lot of people wanted an open-world Zelda game, and that's what they got. Even with that, Breath of the Wild still had its detractors. Like, I mean, there were still people who, you know, were bigger fans of the older games more so than Breath of the Wild. So it was like, even though they got what they wanted, I guess it just wasn't enough to satisfy them. And, you know, that's okay. You know, if you prefer the older Zelda games over the new ones, that's perfectly fine. In fact, you know, I'm actually going to be giving a hot take. Like I said, hot takes are going to be one of the things that's going to happen on the podcast. So hopefully everybody will look forward to that. But anyway, I'll get to my hot take about the Zelda in a second. Let's just focus on what I think of Tears of the Kingdom so far. But before we do that, first, let me discuss my overall impressions of Breath of the Wild. So far, that, like, before Tears of the Kingdom, that Breath of the Wild was my favorite Nintendo Switch game and my favorite Zelda game, because Breath of the Wild really put you in that it really put you in the shoes of Link, which essentially was the whole point of the series. You know, you were put in the perspective of Link. You are that character, so it's like you feel like you're actually there. Like, that's how immersive the world was in Breath of the Wild. Like, you felt like you were actually there. Tears of the Kingdom has that exact same feeling, but Breath of the Wild was such an amazing 10 out of 10 game that I thought that it was not going to be surpassed. Like, from the story to the gameplay and all the other details about the game too. You know, the storyline in Breath of the Wild was really, really well executed and everything. So at first I thought it could not be topped, because, you know, when Nintendo announced that a sequel was going to be made, I had high expectations. Like, I wanted it to, at the very least, be on par with Breath of the Wild. But I gotta say right now, Tears of the Kingdom surprised the hell out of me. Like, holy shit. I mean, I knew this sequel was going to be up there with Breath of the Wild, but I had no idea it was going to surpass it by not even a mile, probably even longer. Tears of the Kingdom managed to surpass Breath of the Wild. I don't know how Nintendo did it. I actually... It's funny, I'm at a loss for words, but I genuinely do not know how they managed to pull it off. But holy hell, they did an amazing job. They really did. Allow me to talk about everything that I've experienced so far with the game, because like I said, I'm not even finished with it. I'm not even a quarter through it. I'm still in the middle of the Gerudo stuff. I only completed Rito, and to be honest, I'm probably not even gonna beat the game for another couple months. But that's just me. So anyway, Tears of the Kingdom, not only the Tears of the Kingdom literally retained everything that was amazing about Breath of the Wild. That's what I love about this game. They didn't change anything. They kept everything that made Breath of the Wild a 10 out of 10 game to begin with. So Nintendo understood that if it wasn't broken, then don't fix it. So I'm glad that they kept the same gameplay. Like, if you were going to go into Tears of the Kingdom and expect it to be totally different, you're going to be disappointed. I went into this sequel thinking that it was going to play exactly like Breath of the Wild, or at the very least be an expansion on Breath of the Wild, which is exactly that. So I went in with that expectation, which is why I'm praising it as we speak. What I was not expecting this game to do was to surpass everything that Breath of the Wild has done. And this includes not only the level of exploration you can do, but the side quests, the gadgets, and probably the best part about it is the characters and the storyline. And I'll get to those in a second. As far as the exploration goes, you know, and there's probably gonna be a couple spoilers. I'll try to keep it as spoiler free as possible. But you get to explore sky islands that were essentially founded by a race but it was by a race known as the Zonai. That's where the sky islands come from, and Link actually has the ability to explore up in those sky islands and everything. But the unfortunate part is that there's a lot of mysterious phenomena going around Hyrule, and so Link has to investigate all of it. And that's as far as I'm going to leave it with the synopsis and everything, because like I said, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's never had the opportunity of playing it yet. I mean, after all, it is a $70 game, which is, you know, it's crazy, but you know what? The $70 was worth it. I'm gonna tell you that right now, because I actually pre-ordered it, and my God, the level of happiness I had when it came at my door, oh man, I was just ready to pop it in and waste no time. And when I did, oh God, I was in for a thrill ride. One thing that I can say about Tears of the Kingdom is that it has a much better pace than Breath of the Wild in terms of the storyline. Like, in Breath of the Wild, it started off with Link waking up from the Shrine of Resurrection after 100 years, and he's on, like, you know, he's on the Great Plateau, and he's trying to figure out where the hell he is, and then he comes across this old man that makes him do at least, like, 4 shrines just so that he can get the paraglider, and then, after you're done with that, then you get to adventure around Hyrule, and that's when the game truly begins. Like, and your first main goal is to get to Kakariko Village to meet Impa. So although I was all right with it, it wasn't the most exciting part of the game. The only thing that it did was just teach you how the game worked and even how the environments work. It didn't really feel like the story was really getting started until the old man revealed himself as King Rome. That was when the game really got started. Because by that point, King Rome would fill you in on the history of Hyrule and what happened during the Great Calamity and stuff like that, and why he's a spirit. So it was like, it kind of took a while for the game to get really good in terms of like just telling the story. Tears of the Kingdom, on the other hand, like literally as soon as you start the game, literally right as you start, like you're playing as Link and you're inside of a cave underneath Hyrule Castle with Zelda, and from there, like essentially shit hits the fan the further you go, and then you discover all these other historical. All these historical graffiti. I wouldn't say graffiti. It's like all these markings on the walls and the caves and stuff that shows the Zonai. And it's like at that point, it wastes no time in getting the story started. The only thing is though, is that you do also have to do 4 shrines in the Sky Islands, at least similar to Breath of the Wild. But the good news is that it doesn't waste, like I said, it doesn't waste time in getting started. Like it gives you a hook right from the very start, and it keeps you enticed to the rest of the game. And so far, I will admit that I've had a lot of trouble putting this game down. This game has been taking up a lot of my hours, and you know what? I'm okay with that. This game is stealing all of my time. Tears of the Kingdom also not only is doing better in terms of the storyline, and I'm gonna say this right now, even though, like I said, I'm not very far in the story, and I only got a couple of the Dragon Tears memories and stuff. But what I will say is that based off of what I've seen of Ganondorf so far, I don't think it's no secret that Ganondorf is in the game because he was in the trailers and stuff. But yeah, Ganondorf. First of all, this is the best version of Ganon that I've ever seen. Even though it's not the first time we've seen Ganondorf in a Zelda game, like obviously that's back in Ocarina of Time. Like that was the first time we really saw him as Ganondorf, which was his human form. But I would argue, and this is probably going to cause a lot of people to probably come at me most likely, because I know Ocarina of Time is a beloved game, and it is a great game because I do have it on N64 and GameCube via the collector's edition set. But what I will say is that this version of Ganondorf is literally the best version of Ganon, period, that I've ever seen. Like, wow, he almost reminds me of this, like, this powerful anime villain who's just has a lust for power and stuff. And, you know, I don't know. It's just that the fact that Ganon has so much personality here, and it's kind of, he's actually kind of, and he's actually pretty terrifying in this game too. Like, it's actually ridiculous. But that's a testament to how amazing Tears of the Kingdom handles its characters, which, the only minor spoiler that I will give is that, and it probably shouldn't be a surprise anyway, is that many of the characters that you knew from Breath of the Wild do return in Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom, as far as I'm concerned, based on what people have told me or what I've read online, is that it does take place, I'd say, 5 years after Breath of the Wild. Like, yeah, that's like half a decade, which would make sense because a lot of the characters from Breath of the Wild have grown, like literally grown. And you probably already know where I'm going to be going with this. But the characters have been the best part about this game, and a large reason for why the story works so well. It's like if you're gonna have a good story, you gotta have great characters. And I gotta say this right now, the Switch Zelda games has the best ensemble of characters that I have ever seen in one game, let alone two. Because the one thing that I will say about the Switch games is that they managed to make memorable NPCs that are more memorable and likable, dare I even say lovable, compared to the Zelda games of the past. Of course, you know, that's not to say that they also didn't have their own lovable NPCs. Like, you had Tetra from Wind Waker, who was basically that game's Zelda, and then you had Twilight Princess, you had Midna. You know, Midna was a great character. Otherwise, it was very difficult for me to really remember all the other ones. Of course, you know, you can't forget about the kids. You know, Beth and the, I forget the other two. I think it was like Tallow and Mallow. Yeah, Tallow and Mallow. They were in Twilight Princess. Yeah, it was Beth, Tallow, and Mallow. I'm just trying to remember off my head. But in this game, you actually have like creative characters, most of which are warrior characters, which I'm a sucker for. I love warrior characters. And that's probably the reason why I love them so much. But as I said, many of the characters that you knew in Breath of the Wild are here. And the one character that everybody is tripping over right now, or to be blunt, they're thirsting over her, is Purah. Purah was, you guys probably remember her from Breath of the Wild. Like, she was literally this little, she was like this little girl. And then you're looking at her like, okay, well, how is she so damn smart and everything? And come to find out, you know, Purah is actually over 100 years old. That's because she's been alive since the Great Calamity, and she's also Impa's older sister. And it's funny, too. Purah is the one that looks the youngest, but Impa is actually younger than Purah. Purah is actually the older sister. But yeah, Purah is over 100. I think she's 125. Yeah, she's over 100 years old. The reason why she retains her youth is because she had an experiment that she did on herself that reversed her aging. So that's why Purah is able to retain her youth, even despite being over a century old, which is insane. Beyond that, Purah is a very, very lovable character. She has a very sweet personality, and she's very, very intelligent. You know, she's actually one of the most important ancient researchers in the game. And a lot of the things that you use in Tears of the Kingdom, particularly the Purah Pad, which is literally named right after her, you know, she's the one who created it. Like, you know what I'm saying? And she's very good. She's a very, very talented engineer and everything. But yeah, in Breath of the Wild, she was like she had the physical appearance of a little girl, but in Tears of the Kingdom, even though it was only 5 years, that woman grew like really fast, almost to the point of slightly being taller than Link, which is insane. And get this, Purah is also voiced by Kate Higgins, which I found out like a couple days ago. I remember when I was playing this on my Twitch, and I was like, wait a second, I know I heard that voice somewhere. Like, that voice is literally familiar to me, and it was bothering me because I know where that voice came from. I just couldn't remember where I heard it. All I know was that I heard this person's voice before, and then I looked it up. It was Kate Higgins. And if you're unfamiliar with Kate Higgins, she's the voice of Sakura Haruno from Naruto. So yeah, a Naruto actress voices a Zelda character. That's insane, because I remember at one point when I played Age of Calamity, Purah's sister Impa was, I don't think it's any secret that her fighting style in that game was inspired by Naruto, and I remember I said something about how, oh yeah, Impa's been watching too much Naruto, because not only is she fighting like a ninja, but she also uses shadow clones just like Naruto. And then come to find out, and it's funny because in that same game, Kate Higgins voiced Purah. She's been voicing that character since Age of Calamity. So it's like it's crazy to me. And that's additionally one of the reasons why I also love the characters, because it's a Kate Higgins character. And there are other prolific voice actors who I'm actually do know is in the game. And like I said, I'm only going off of what I've heard so far, on where I am so far. There's another character who's voiced by an actress who I absolutely love, and that's Christina V. Christina V is easily one of the most talented actresses ever. She has an amazing voice, both as a singer and as an actress, and she has an amazing personality outside of her roles. Like, if you've seen this woman in interviews and meeting fans and stuff, like this woman is a humble soul, and a large reason for why I respect her immensely as a human being, more so than a professional. Like, not only do I have immense respect for her as a professional, but also as a human being. The reason I'm bringing her up is because she's the voice of one of my favorite characters in the game, Tulin, and I'm gonna get to him in a second. So, like I said, Purah is the character that everybody is thirsting over. Not hard to see why. And I gotta say that she probably has the best character design in the entire game, because they took her design from Breath of the Wild and took elements of her Age of Calamity design to a degree and combined it together, and it's the perfect look for Purah. Like, literally how she looks in this game is something I can definitely see her wearing. Like, I cannot think of anything else that would work for her. And she essentially takes Impa's role from the last game. In the last game, Impa was the one giving you the important missions, but in this game, Purah is actually giving you the important missions. So Purah's role in this game is extremely important, and I'm all right with that. I'm pretty sure everybody else is too. Now, because I brought up Tulin, we'll talk about him. Tulin was another character from Breath of the Wild. He was a minor NPC. He was like one of those little child birds that you could talk to and everything. And I'm pretty sure you guys remember Teba. Does anybody remember Teba? He was the Rito that helped Link fight against Divine Beast Valmetto. He actually, and you guys also probably remember the village elder from Breath of the Wild, Kennelly. He was that big Rito. In Tears of the Kingdom, and this is also kind of a spoiler too, I'm gonna warn you. But in Tears of the Kingdom, Teba is back, and he's taken over as the village elder. And if you're unfamiliar with Tulin is Teba's son. So, and he's actually grown up quite a lot from the last game. Tulin's gotten taller, almost to Link's height. He still sounds like a boy though. I mean, like I said, Christina V is the one voicing him. But I actually really like his character arc. I'm not a big fan of children. I'm not gonna lie. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a huge fan of kids at all, even child characters. But with Tulin, I absolutely love his arc. He's a character. He was one of those like child characters who believe that while he does have his morals and does have that desire to be the hero, he's one of those cocky characters, or initially he was. Like, he believed that he could handle the entire situation that was going on in Rito all by himself. Like, there was a whole blizzard that was being caused by this monster and stuff, and that's actually the main theme of the entire game, like all the strange phenomena that you have to investigate and stuff. So, Tulin thought that he could do it on his own and everything, and that he doesn't need to really fly as a pack. Teba was attempting to teach his son that exact value of what it means to work as a team and everything. And in short, to put it shortly, his experience with working with Ling to take down the threat absolutely changed him. Like, literally when you first meet Tulin, he's very arrogant and cocky, but after you defeat the threat in Rito Village and you get rid of the permanent blizzard, Tulin is a completely different person. Like, he absolutely learned a lot from that experience, and I absolutely loved that. Like, he actually matured through that experience, and as a reward, Teba passed down the Great Eagle Bow, which was Rivali's weapon. Like, everybody remembers that weapon as being Rivali's weapon, but yes, Teba had that bow, and he passed it on to Tulin. So now Tulin is the wielder of the Great Eagle Bow, which again was Rivali's weapon. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with who Rivali was, he was one of the 4 Hylian champions that was mentioned in Breath of the Wild, which I'm sure most of you know. But in case you're unfamiliar, there were 4 Hylian champions that were essentially the warriors that protected Hyrule. There was one from Gerudo, there was one Rito, there was one Goron, and there was one Zora. The Zora was Mipha, the Goron was Daruk, the Rito was Rivali, and then the Gerudo was Urbosa, who, by the way, is my personal favorite. So yeah, there were 4 champions, and they all lived during the Great Calamity, and all 4 of them unfortunately died during the Great Calamity when they were taken out by 4 different versions of Ganon, which, if you play Breath of the Wild, the 4 versions of Ganon that you fight were the ones that annihilated the champions. Like, yeah, the Thunderblight Ganon, who in my opinion was the hardest one, actually the hardest boss in Breath of the Wild, period. And then you had Windblight Ganon, then you had Waterblight Ganon, then you had Fireblight Ganon. They were the ones that took out all the respective champions. So these new characters that we have in Tears of the Kingdom are essentially like the descendants. Well, at least for the most part. I do know that Raiju is, and I cannot wait to talk about her next. Holy shit, I got a lot to say about Raiju actually. But as I said, with Tulin, he was a great character. Like, I absolutely love Tulin. His ability to essentially cast wind so that he can blow you across the screen in a straight line when you're paragliding and stuff. It makes it easier for you to paraglide to areas that you probably cannot reach and stuff, because you couldn't do that in Breath of the Wild. But overall, Tulin is an amazing character. I absolutely love seeing him, and I enjoyed his arc and everything. So for that, he's definitely one of my favorite characters. So right now, like I said, the only place I'm in right now is the Gerudo town. I still have yet to complete most of it, but I have a lot to say about Raiju. Raiju was, for those of you unfamiliar with the character, like I said, she was a very major character. She was I would say she was a major character. I would say that. Yeah, she was major enough in Breath of the Wild because you had to team up with her to take down Divine Beast Vandaboris, who was the, he was like the elephant one, the problem was that he was inside, the beast was inside of like this sandstorm that was like a thunderstorm. So Raiju had this helmet called a thunder helmet, which guards anybody who's close to it in proximity from lightning strikes. So it would make you like impervious. You know what I'm saying? It was a very fun boss fight too. Might have been my personal favorite one, but Thunderblight Ganon, like I said, was the hardest one. Like he gave me so much hell, mainly because he was the fastest. But the one thing that I love about Raiju so much is the fact that she had lost her mother when she was very young, and she took the throne of the village chief when she was only 12 years old. So imagine being someone like Raiju in her shoes and having to fulfill such a heavy burden and having it like having the weight of the world on your back. You know, Raiju essentially had to deal with that, like taking the throne way too soon. So Raiju basically had to grow up really, really, really fast. And despite the burden that was placed on her, she managed to do a great job as the Gerudo chief. And it's worth noting that she is the direct descendant of Urbosa, because Urbosa was her ancestor. So because of this, Raiju does possess Urbosa's lightning powers, and in this game, you gotta keep this in mind though. In the last game, we never really saw Raiju using any lightning powers. It's in this game where we actually see her use lightning for the first time, and she's actually like practicing it to learn how to perfect this. So in a way, Raiju is actually starting to become Urbosa. That's the reason why I love her so much in Tears of the Kingdom. Like, on top of, well, her updated design really isn't necessarily like that different from Breath of the Wild, but I absolutely love her updated design, especially because she wields 2 swords this time, and I am a massive sucker for characters who carry 2 swords instead of just one, because in my opinion, if you carry 2 swords, you're cool. Like, characters who wield 2 swords are always cool. But Raiju also, like I said, Raiju not only carries 2 blades, which is something that Urbosa couldn't even do, or at least, like, I think she did actually. I think I might actually be wrong. I'm sorry. My memory's a bit fuzzy at the moment. But yeah, Urbosa also had 2 blades as well, which is again one of the reasons why Urbosa was my favorite Hylian champion. But Raiju is starting to really become Urbosa now, especially since she's perfected her lightning powers. And damn, man, she might even be one of the most powerful characters in the game, if I'm being honest with you. Well, each character definitely has their own strength and weakness and stuff, but I think it's safe to say that with what Raiju can do, she might be one of the most powerful characters. She even had a badass moment too. Like, there's a moment during the quest, where in Karakara Bazaar, the Gerudos were being swarmed by an army of Gibdos. And that's another thing. This game actually brings back a lot of classic enemies like the Likes and the Gibdos. But yeah, they're being swarmed by Gibdos, so Link has to go over there to help them out. And by the time they get there, Raiju does this insane lightning attack that literally eviscerates all the Gibdos, and it happened on stream, and I was marking out. Like, to see Raiju pull off something that badass was just insane. It just only made me love her even more than I already did. Like, we actually got to see a badass moment from her. And as far as some people have also kind of really debated as far as what her age was. We can kind of establish that in Breath of the Wild she was 12. I think that's what the art book said. There was an art book that actually implied that she was 12, and because Tears of the Kingdom is like 5 years later, she would basically be 17 years old, which I could kind of see. She does look like she would be around that age, if anything. But as I said, she's really badass in this game, and the fact that she's starting to become Urbosa is actually the reason why she's in my top 5 favorite characters in the game. But otherwise, that's all I can really say about Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, there's a lot more that I could have said, but I'm only going off of muscle memory here, so It's very difficult for me to recount everything all at once. But what I will say, though, before we move on to the next part of what I want to talk about, is that I do want to address the fact that the powers that you use, especially since Link has an arm now, like the Ultra Hand and the Ascend and the Fuse, I love these features. Oh, and Create as well. Like, I love these features. This game gives you so much to work with. It's like the game is limitless at this point. Like, it is absolutely criminal how much freedom and creativity that this game gives to you. And it makes puzzle solving even more fun. Like, this game, Tears of the Kingdom, like, I'm going to put all my cards on the table and say this. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is not a 10 out of 10 game. It's an 11 out of 10. It gets an 11. So far, and it's funny, like I said, I'm not even close to being finished with the game, much less a quarter of a way. And yet, here I am already putting all my cards on the table and saying that this game is an 11 out of 10. Like, bar none. This game is fucking amazing. I absolutely love this game so much. And I highly recommend it. I'll even go as far to say, and I'm probably going to get dislikes for saying this, it's the best Zelda game. Like, so far, this has been the best Zelda game. And remember how I said earlier in the podcast that I actually have a hot take as far as Zelda is concerned? Well, here it is. I think the Zelda games on Switch, which would be Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I think these two are amongst the best Zelda games in the entire series. I will actually say that. And for the record, I will say that although Tears of the Kingdom is better than Breath of the Wild, I still consider these two to be a perfect pair. They both had their own identity. Even though the gameplays were very similar, they still had their own identity and different feel. You know what I'm saying? But there you go. That's my hot take. The Zelda Switch games are easily superior to the older Zelda games. The only Zelda game from the past that I think still holds up, and there's only two of them I can think of, and this is only from my own perspective, is Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. And I know that there's a lot of people that love Majora's Mask and Wind Waker and stuff like that, and even Skyward Sword. But for me personally, I would say Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Like, if we're talking specifically older Zelda games. But that's just me. And the only reason how come I don't like them as much is because the freedom that the Switch games gives to you kind of feels like exactly what Zelda should have been to begin with, which it still did. Even in the older games, you still had an exploration, but I don't know. I feel like with a game as immersive as Zelda, I feel like having an open world makes the games flow through a lot better. It makes it truly feel like you're adventuring, versus having a more limited world to explore and having it be just only a tad bit more linear. It's a little bit more linear. That's the best way I could say. But like I said, I know that there's going to be people who's going to be upset about it. Just keep this in mind. It's just my personal opinion. I don't think anyone should look at this or listen to this podcast and go, oh, well, Larry the Lone Wolf thinks that his opinion is above others. Well, guess what? Well, your opinion sucks. The older Zelda games are way better than the Switch games, and that's a fact. That's never my intention, like, to upset people over my opinions. That's never my intention. My intention is to just make my opinions known because I like to be upfront and honest. And if you have a hot take that also differs from the norm, by all means, share it. Your voice should be heard just like everybody else. So I feel like some people really need to be more open-minded to others' opinions, even if it's not the most popular opinion in the world. Like, I think unpopular opinions are more interesting to listen to because of how different they are. Like, say for example, someone says that Tekken 3 is one of the worst games ever. Like, that's one hell of a hot take to make, to call Tekken 3 one of the worst games ever, especially since it has a reputation of being considered one of the greatest games ever made, as well as one of the best fighting games ever made. So at that point, I'm just interested in knowing, what is it about Tekken 3 that you dislike? I don't have to agree with it, but I'm still interested in knowing why you dislike it so much, even if I don't agree with it. You know what I'm saying? And even then, I would be very respectful about it. So just look at it from that perspective. I'm just here to let you know how I feel about the series. And you know, I love Zelda a lot. I absolutely love Zelda, and I see why a lot of people love the series so much. But I would say that I get my happiness the most as far as Zelda games from the ones on the Switch. And I will go as far to say that Tears of the Kingdom is by far the best Zelda game, like bar none. And I'll even say that both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have the greatest ensemble of characters that are way more memorable than many of the other NPCs from the older games. And like I said, the only memorable NPCs from the past games that I can even think of is Nagi the fairy from Ocarina of Time. I'm pretty sure everybody remembers her. Tetra from Wind Waker, and then Midna from Twilight Princess. But in Breath of the Wild, let's see, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom respectively, how many characters can you remember that are NPCs? You know, let's see. You have Rivali, you have Daruk, you have Urbosa, you have Mipha. You know, that's the Hylian champions right there. And then you have King Rome. You have Teba. You have Raiju. You have Tulin. You have Yorinobu, who was the Goron. And then you also have I forget the Zora's name. That's the brother. Sidon. I had to think about it for a second. Sidon. That's Mipha's brother. You know, you got all these memorable NPC characters. It's like, how can you, how many Zelda games can say that they have this many memorable characters in just one or even two games alone? And that's also, and don't forget, we also have other memorable characters like Purah, of course. Like, I'm pretty sure someone's gonna be like, well, "What about Purah?" Yeah, I'm like, yeah, of course, Purah. Like, the hell, she's easily like one of the best characters, period, in a Zelda game. Like, not even just in Tears of the Kingdom, just one of the best in general. And that's also somewhat of a hot take in and of itself. But, you know, you had her, you have Impa, and then you also have Robbie. You know, who could forget about Robbie? Like, that dude is so ridiculously charismatic. And I would mention Beetle. I would actually mention Beetle. But the thing is that he's been in practically every Zelda games at least since Wind Waker. So it's like with but Beetle is probably, and for that, Beetle is one of the best Zelda characters in the entire series because he's the wandering merchant. Like, even though I'm more of a fan of the merchant from Resident Evil 4, Beetle is still my boy. I'll even go as far as say that he's probably my second favorite merchant in a video game. Second only to the merchant from Resident Evil 4, but that's just me. And then you also had the other, and don't forget, there were also other NPCs from Breath of the Wild, like Cass. I'm pretty sure everybody remembers Cass. He was the Rito who would play that, I forget the name of that. I think it's not the harmonica. But he would play an instrument that would reveal shrine quests and stuff, and his songs would give Link riddles. Like, Cass was a very memorable NPC character, and he was very well loved by the Zelda community. And in Tears of the Kingdom, they're, like I said, not only have our favorite characters come back, but they've grown a lot, and they're doing greater things, or even becoming stronger and more mature. I mean, we saw it with Raiju. Like in Breath of the Wild, she was almost not really doing much of anything, like as far as doing powers and shit. But in Tears of the Kingdom, Raiju is becoming a full-blown warrior. Like, she's not just the Gerudo chief who overlooks the entire Gerudo village and stuff, but she's also becoming a warrior. And like I said, you know how much I love warrior characters, so it's like, Of course I would have loved that. And Tulin is also a warrior character himself. He just had to learn, he just had to mature himself and learn that, and understand the value of partners and stuff like that. Like being able to work as a team, you know, and being a leader and stuff like that. Like he had to learn that stuff before he would be considered worthy enough to wield the Great Eagle Bow. And even, you know, Teba even admitted that it was always his intention to hand it down to his son, but he was just waiting for the right moment to give it to him, which I think is great storytelling. Like, even little bits and character moments like that are particularly the reason why these characters work so well, especially compared to the other Zelda games. But that's everything I have to say about Tears of the Kingdom. My mouth is pretty much dry on it, and you can clearly see that it's a game that I have a lot of thoughts on. And by all means, please let me know what you guys think of Tears of the Kingdom in the comments below. Do you love the game or do you hate the game? By all means, please let me know. And now we're going to move on to the last topic of this Prelude podcast, where we're going to talk about the PlayStation Showcase, more specifically, a game that was announced and one that people have rumored for so long, and we're actually going to be getting it. And at first, I was worried that we was never going to get it. And at first, I thought it was just all hoopla. Like, I didn't think it was actually going to happen. But I was wrong. And we're actually getting it. And this particular game that I am referring to is none other than Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear. Yes, Metal Gear is returning. Holy shit. I got a lot to say. So a lot of you who have followed my channel for so long probably remember the Metal Gear June marathon that I did back during the pandemic era, which I honestly would love to do over again. I would probably need to practice the MSX games again, though, because they really were some of the hardest games I ever played. But I will say that if you've watched me during that time, then you already know that Metal Gear is perhaps my favorite franchise of all time in terms of story. You know, it's hard for me to say what my favorite video game franchise is because there's so many game franchises that I love, like, you know, Resident Evil, Tekken, Zelda, Sonic, obviously Metal Gear, Soul Calibur, Street Fighter. You know, there's a lot of video game franchises that I love. Oh, and also don't forget Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and I think that's about that I can name off the top of my head. But Metal Gear has always been top 5 material for me. Like, that's definitely in my top 5 favorite video game franchises altogether. Metal Gear is one franchise where it focuses a lot on storytelling more so than on gameplay, which is something that most people seem to be fine with because Metal Gear does tell a great story. It does, and it's a very immersive lore because it goes all the way back to at least World War I, World War II, I think it does. They actually explain how it goes all the way back there. But video game wise, though, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is considered the first of the series because it takes place in 1964. And that game, for me, is one of the best games ever made. I absolutely loved the graphics, which was amazing for the PS2 at the time when it first came out. And even the HD re-release by Blue Point Games was really good. And it unlocked the game to 60 frames, too, which was an added bonus. But also, the game had amazing survival tactics that you could use and an amazing combat system that was an improvement on the past 2 games, I would say. And even the soundtrack was really, really good. And as far as storyline goes, it was the best told. Like, I will say right now that Snake Eater probably had the best storyline. Like, just if we're talking specifically one game, it would be Snake Eater. Like, I would absolutely say that one had the best storyline, just in one game. So, Konami announced that a remake of this game is going to be released for the PS5. There's no release date for it, which is a huge indication that the game is still in the works, but they're making it very clear that it is on the horizon, that we are going to get another Metal Gear game, and it's going to be a remake to one of the best games of all time. Now, instead of calling it Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater Remake, they decided to call it Metal Gear Solid Delta, which I think is a great choice to do because it differentiates it from the original game to a degree and avoids calling it 3, because most modern audiences are going to think that, oh, it's their Metal Gear Solid game, but we just had 5, so what happened, right? The only thing I'm unaware of is whether or not if Kojima is involved. I personally don't think he is involved, but I think he should be, though, only because of how well the Fox engine was. But I'm not sure what direction Konami is going in with this game. All I know is that I'm just afraid that they may screw it up, but I hope they don't, because Snake Eater is such an easy game to remake, especially since we have the HD re-release that you can work off of. So hopefully they retain everything that made Snake Eater a 10 out of 10 game. And another thing about Snake Eater is the iconic theme song by Cynthia Harrell, who also did the ending theme song to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, by the way. But her performance in Snake Eater is, I'm going to say this right now, one of the most iconic video game theme songs of all time. Snake Eater. Snake Eater is a song that even if you've never played the game before, you've most likely heard of it before, because it's played everywhere by many video game fans who, like me, consider it to be one of the best themes ever made. And it's not hard to see why that is. Really not hard. And it really fits in with the tone of the game, too. And everyone also remembers that iconic opening in the game that was basically a James Bond homage. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. There's a lot of things about Snake Eater that I absolutely adore, and I'm barely even scratching the surface. But when I say that I was absolutely stunned when Konami announced the game, I was shocked and speechless beyond belief. Even now, like, I'm struggling to figure out what to say. It's just that I didn't think it was actually going to happen, because before Konami said anything about this game officially, the whole idea of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater being remade was all hearsay. It was just that. Like, people were just spreading it around, pretending like it was a fact. But in hindsight, at the time at least, it was all hearsay. Now we can finally say that we are going to get a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. And like I said, it's been rumored for years. It's been rumored for years. Only now are we finally getting it. And I am so happy to see this game get the remake that it deserves. And, it was funny. When I was watching this trailer, I almost cried. I actually almost cried. Because this game it means a lot to me. Like, this game, along with Metal Gear Solid 1, are some of my favorite games of all time. Like, specifically, literally just the first and the third Metal Gear are literally amongst my favorites. And to a degree, 5. 5 was really good, too. But I would definitely say I'm more of a fan of 1 and 3. 1 and 3 is literally, like, the pinnacles of the series. But as I said, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater takes place in 1964, and is the beginning, chronologically, of the Metal Gear storyline, if we're going off the games and stuff. Even though, like I said, the lore goes all the way back to World War I, but franchise-wise, 3 is the first of the series. And it follows Naked Snake, who, and most of you already know the tale anyway, but for those unfamiliar, tells the tale of Naked Snake, who goes on a mission known as Operation Snake Eater, where he has to destroy a nuclear bipedal weapon known as the Shagohod and assassinate his former mentor, who defected to the Soviet Union. So that's what the game's about. It's much more deeper than that. And if you don't want to hear any spoilers, At this point, you can basically like turn off the podcast because I don't have much else to talk about after this. And I don't want to spoil it if you've never played any of these games for the first time. And this is honestly the rare opportunity to play a game that's damn near 20 years old with a fresh new idea and blind perception of what the game is. Like, you actually have an opportunity to experience this game for the first time. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you can basically turn off the podcast right now. And I will say thank you for listening if you have made it this far. And stay tuned for more future episodes of this podcast, or at least what the official beginning of this podcast. Like I said, this is only the intro. But otherwise, yeah, you can basically end it here. So now on to the spoilers. So in Metal Gear Solid 3, Naked Snake is basically Big Boss. For those of you who don't know who Big Boss is, he was a major character in the MSX games. He was the commander of Foxhound, where he would send one of his rookie members, Solid Snake, on a mission to Outer Heaven to infiltrate the base and destroy Metal Gear. The twists of the game literally ended with a massive twist, which revealed that Big Boss was the one who ran Outer Heaven, and he essentially sent Solid Snake there to have him killed and stuff. So he was essentially baiting him there. So yeah, Big Boss in that game was portrayed as the villain. So you would think that him being the hero in Snake Eater is kind of, it's kind of counterintuitive when you think about it, because like you would think that, especially without the context. The thing is that when Big Boss was younger, he was trained as a war hero. Like he was considered as a war hero because of what he did during Snake Eater. He even got his right eye shot off by the muzzle of Major Ocelot's gun, or Revolver Ocelot's gun. What the hell am I saying? But yeah, the muzzle of the gun burnt off his right eye, which caused permanent blindness, and that's the reason he wears his eye patch. But also there's a whole series of events that have happened in Big Boss's character arc that led him down to the dark path that he went down. Like I said, he was a war hero in Snake Eater, so you might be wondering, what was it about Big Boss that made him go down the path that he did by the events of the MSX games? It's simple. Political manipulation. Here's what I mean. Allow me to elaborate. So, because he was essentially being used to destroy not only... Well, first of all, he was already burdened with having to destroy this entire nuclear bipedal weapon that has the ability to basically destroy an entire continent. But he's also tasked with eliminating his former mentor, who he's known for over 10 years. Like, this is someone who he essentially owes a big part of his humanity to, and now he's in a situation where he has to kill her, or else he's gonna be executed. Like, essentially, Big Boss would be executed, and the rest of Fox would have been in major trouble, no pun intended, because, Major Zero. But yeah, they would all be in major trouble if they did not assassinate the boss, because unfortunately Russia believed that the US was responsible for blowing up one of their facilities. But President Lyndon B. Johnson had to let Khrushchev know that, who was the guy running Russia at the time, he had to let him know that they had nothing to do with it, and the proof was not only to destroy the Shagohod, but also assassinate the boss. And they decided that Big Boss was the only one who was skilled enough to pull off this entire mission, which he was. The problem is that because he had to do this, it really made him become directionless. You know what I'm saying? Like, Big Boss was traumatized at the fact that he had to kill his former mentor after everything that she's done for him and everything. And when he found out the truth of why she really defected to the Soviet Union, it broke him. You know what I'm saying? Like, Eva, who was one of the major characters. By this point, I'm always speaking to people who are already familiar with the game at this point. So Eva tells Big Boss the true events of what have really happened. So you know how, I'll give you an example for anime fans who are potentially listening to this. So you know Itachi Uchiha from Naruto? You know how Itachi essentially ruined his entire life to save Sasuke by eliminating the entire Uchiha clan? Had Itachi not do that, the Leaf Village would have killed the entire Uchiha clan, including Sasuke. So in order to avoid Sasuke's death, Itachi had to be the one to slaughter the entire Uchiha clan himself. And then Sasuke found out the truth of what Itachi really was doing, and it was done specifically to protect him. So essentially, the Leaf Village used Itachi for something that they feared was going to happen to them. Like the Uchiha would essentially take over the Leaf Village and stuff. Think of it like that in Metal Gear Solid 3. It's basically like that. You know, the boss was never intended anything malicious. She defected to the Soviet Union specifically to obtain the philosopher's legacy and then bring it back safely. And she knew that she was going to be labeled as a traitor for defecting to the Soviet Union. So she knew that Big Boss would be the one to be set after her. And essentially, she allowed him to kill her. But of course, you know, she didn't make it easy for him. But she knew that he was destined to take her down. So she literally gave up her entire life for the sake of America, much like how Itachi gave up his entire life for the sake of the Hidden Leaf Village. They're literally these two story arcs are almost the same. So it's not like it's never been done before, but the fact that this has been done so masterfully in both instances, I will say that for a record, but the fact that it was done so masterfully in Snake Eater is a testament to why Snake Eater is considered one of the best games ever made. It's amazing, complex storytelling that has amazing, well-written characters. You know, you had Big Boss, you had Eva, and then you had Revolver Ocelot, and then you had the boss as well, even Major Zero, and then you had Siga and Paramedic. You know, you had all these major characters, you had all these memorable characters that would eventually go on in the Metal Gear series, storyline-wise at least, to do bigger things. Well, maybe except for... with Paramedic, it's hard to say, because Paramedic was, and it was funny, too, because in the original Metal Gear Solid 1, she was called Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark is Paramedic's real name. And in the first Metal Gear Solid game, they refer to her as a he. So, and that's one of the things about Metal Gear that's a little confusing, is that the one thing that's very, very confusing about it is that it does contradict itself a lot. Most people don't even notice it anyway, because the overall structure of the story is so good that it distracts you from its inconsistencies. But Metal Gear does have a lot of inconsistencies, and most people probably don't even notice it. One of the inconsistencies is Dr. Clark being referred to as a male, and particularly in Metal Gear Solid 3, being a female, because you got to remember, even though Metal Gear Solid 3 is a prequel, it came out a couple years, at least I'd say 6 years after Metal Gear Solid 1, which was on PS1, and Metal Gear Solid 3 was a PS2 game that came out in 2004. So Kojima probably... I don't think Kojima did this on purpose. It most likely was just a slight accidental inconsistency on his part still. But, he made Dr. Clark or Paramedic female and stuff. The only thing that was consistent was Sigget. Sigget was the black guy of the group, which again is kind of funny too, because the game takes place in 1964, and you got to remember, this was during the whole segregation rights thing and all the race car stuff. Not going to get into the politics stuff. But, Kojima didn't really put that in there too much. Although there was some information in the game that Sigurd would give to Snake about, how some people, being racially profiled, stuff like that. So it wasn't like the whole racial thing wasn't brought up at all. It just wasn't the focal point of the game, and I'm glad it wasn't. But the reason why I say that Sigurd was the most consistent of the other NPCs is because he would go on to become he would go on to become Donald Anderson. Well, that's his real name, Donald Anderson. And you guys probably remember Donald Anderson from Metal Gear Solid 1. Yeah, that was Sigurd. Unfortunately, he died in that game, but it's the same character. So there you go. Another character who managed to stay in the series for a very long time besides Big Boss himself is, well, two other characters, Eva and Zero. Both those characters survived all the way up into Metal Gear Solid 4, which actually takes place in the last part of the Metal Gear timeline. Specifically, it takes place 50 years after the events of Snake Eater. So Snake Eater was 1964, and Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots, was 2014. So there you go. But Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was the start of everything, and it portrayed its tragic character arcs very well, particularly Big Boss. This was only the start. You got to remember that. Because he was a war hero who was being used by the government, and because of his experience, by Portable Ops and Peace Walker, Big Boss decided to create his own private mercenary company where he could recruit soldiers who could live normal lives and stuff and not be used as tools by the governments. So while Big Boss had good intentions, this made him a public enemy. Because of the fact that he was essentially creating private military companies outside of the US's jurisdiction, this made him a public enemy. Since he was literally doing it outside of the law. So that's the reason why everybody vilified Big Boss. That's why if you only specifically played MSX and you only saw him as a villain, and if you just only played that only into Metal Gear Solid 4 and avoided all the prequels, it would be hard to believe that he would turn good. Well, in a way, actually, I'm lying. It would almost be like watching the original Star Wars trilogy. You gotta remember, the original Star Wars trilogy started off with Darth Vader as the bad guy. We literally never knew anything about him other than the fact that by The Empire Strikes Back, he reveals himself to be the biological father of Luke Skywalker, who is the main hero. So we know that Darth Vader is his father, Anakin, but we never really knew too much about him other than the fact that he's evil. But why did he become evil? But we didn't know that in the first three films because the prequels wouldn't even come out for years. But the reason why him turning good in Return of the Jedi was so powerful is because it was a long build-up. And like I said, him being Luke's dad and everything, it was only a matter of time before he would eventually break and actually help his son and turn on the, Emperor Palpatine. You know what I'm saying? So you got to look at it from that perspective. It's the same way, but because, Big Boss in Metal Gear Solid 4, he would turn good. Even though he was believed to have been dead in Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, because he was incinerated, he was essentially revived in Metal Gear Solid 4. He actually explained how he's still alive even in Metal Gear Solid 4, I'm sorry. But yeah, he was still alive in that game, and that was his true death. Big Boss passed away to Fox Die, if you're wondering what happened. Yeah, and it's funny too, because Fox Die was also what killed Liquid Snake too. Unfortunately, it runs in the family, so it, shit happens, right? But yeah, Fox Die was what took Big Boss's life. So there you go. He went out with the one thing that was a major plot point since the first Metal Gear Solid. And it came full circle too. So, but going back to what I said about him being a tragic character, that's literally, in a way, Big Boss is basically Anakin Skywalker. When you think about it. He was once a hero, but he became disillusioned and he unfortunately turned to the dark side because of terrible things that have happened to both of them. In Anakin's case, he lost Padme, and in Big Boss's case, he lost he lost his mentor, the boss. So both of them experienced that level of loss. Like, they lost that one important figure that gave them their reason to essentially live and stuff. But on top of all of that, you also got to take into account that Big Boss was being used as a tool to essentially further all the government's schemes or their benefits, literally for their benefit, not for the benefit of himself. He was pulling off this entire mission for the benefit of the U.S. government. And Big Boss was sickened by this. That's why he refused to shake the president's hand and everything. That was a big move for him. This was a sign that he was not happy with what he had to do. Like, even though he was commended for what he had done, he wasn't happy about it. Because they used him to kill his former mentor, and that's the reason why he would go on to create PMCs. And because he created PMCs, this made him a public enemy. This made him a wanted man, since he was creating private military companies outside of the U.S.'s jurisdiction. So that's the reason why he was vilified. I know I'm repeating what I said earlier, but I want to reiterate this because it's going to lead into why he becomes the main antagonist by the first Metal Gear game on MSX. So for a brief period, he refused to be called Big Boss because it reminded him so much of his mentor. And so he wanted to refuse that side of himself. He kind of rejected that part of himself and always stuck to his Naked Snake moniker. It wasn't until the ending of Peace Walker where Big Boss finally decided to accept that name for himself. And not only that, but he also talked about the possibility of bringing an outer heaven. Peace Walker was essentially the seed that planted Big Boss's eventual, for lack of a better way of putting it, heel turn and creating outer heaven, a PMC where soldiers would not be tools. So the best way to describe Big Boss's character in a nutshell is that he had good intentions, but he did some horrible things in the long run. The famous saying, the worst things are done with the best intentions? That's literally Big Boss's character. Literally, just that sentence alone is his entire character arc summed up in one sentence. And that's the reason why I think Big Boss is the greatest Metal Gear character ever. I think everybody probably will agree with that. Big Boss is easily Metal Gear's greatest character. He's a tragic hero who faced a lot of adversities, and unfortunately it really messed him up, and it sent him down a dark path that by the events of Metal Gear Solid 4, which was many, many years later, and even after the Outer Heaven and Zanzibar land stuff that had happened, and betraying Solid Snake like that, like, even after all of that, like, it took him that long to finally understand that he was wrong and that he was going about everything that his mentor said the wrong way. There's a crucial plot point in the games called the boss's will, and essentially it's what the boss said before she passed away. The fact that what the boss was saying was not to change the world, but to leave it as it is. Because she also didn't really like how soldiers were being used and everything, but she at the same time didn't want, and she also thought that war was an awful thing that everybody shouldn't have to go through and stuff. But the boss was still a firm believer in just accepting everything as it is. You know what I'm saying? Big Boss kind of misinterpreted everything that she said, and thought that by creating a world without soldiers being used as tools, like, he thought that by creating PMCs that this is what she would have wanted and everything. But unknowingly, the character who fulfilled the boss's will without even knowing who the boss was, believe it or not, Solid Snake. Yeah. Big Boss's own clone son. Yeah. Solid Snake was the only one who who actually followed the boss's will unknowingly. Because he knew, because you gotta remember, he was facing threats that would have changed the world on a global scale. Like, he fought Metal Gear Rex. You know, he was involved in the Big Shell incident, involved with Raiden and stuff like that. So he was essentially trying to, and then in Guns of the Patriots, he's literally trying to stop the Patriots from taking over the entire war, like the entire war system and everything. Because the Patriots were essentially controlling. Well, they weren't even just controlling war; they were controlling everything. And you know, Snake was trying to put an end to all of that. You know what I'm saying? So Solid Snake was just trying to keep the world as it was. You know, everybody was trying to change it, but Solid Snake was trying to prevent them from changing the world. So he essentially actually understood the boss's will, and so therefore Solid Snake can be considered the true hero of Metal Gear. And I don't think anyone's going to deny that. Like I said, Big Boss fell from grace. Like, even though he is the best character, you got to understand, that man experienced a downfall. You know, like I said, he was a good guy from the very start, but he did a lot of awful things as he got older. And then he ended up betraying Solid Snake and everything. You know, especially since he became so powerful by that. You got to also take this into account. Big Boss managed to create successful PMCs in the later years of his life, and this made him become very powerful. And because he had this level, because he had so much power in his hands, it corrupted him. Like, you gotta think that he created, you know, MSF, he created Outer Heaven, he created Zanzibar Land. So it's like he had 3 successful PMCs. Well, not really Diamond Dogs. Diamond Dogs was Venom Snake's thing, but I think Big Boss was involved in that to some degree. More so his Phantom Venom Snake, which was the medic from Ground Zeroes. But in Phantom Pain, the real Big Boss only made a cameo. Well, not really. He was in the beginning. He was the... You know the wrapped up patient from the start of that game? Where you're getting out of the hospital bed after XOF invades the entire hospital? And the dude refers to himself as Ishmael. Yeah, that was Big Boss. That was Big Boss in disguise. So yeah, he was at the start, but again, you were not supposed to know that. But, and then, like I said, the game literally fooled you into thinking that you really were playing Big Boss the entire time, but you was actually playing as the medic who ended up suffering the exact same coma as Big Boss did in Ground Zeroes when, you know, when the girl, I forget her name, she's Louise, Paz. When Paz sacrificed herself by dropping herself out of that helicopter before the final bomb inside of her exploded. So yeah, Big Boss technically only made a cameo, only 2 different cameos in the entire game, realistically. But I would consider his real cameo to be at the very end of the game, where he swaps identities with his medic, and because he did this, this allowed Big Boss to create Outer Heaven. This allowed him to create Outer Heaven, which would take him years to build. And going back to what I said before, this made Big Boss really, really fucked up. Like, the dude became so powerful that it corrupted his mind. Like, he was so powerful that he felt like he could do anything. And this is what led to his downfall. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's why it's easy to say Solid Snake is the true hero of Metal Gear versus Big Boss, who, while at first was a hero, drifted away, went down a dark path, and, well, got incinerated for it. So, But that's what I love about Metal Gear, just the complexity of its characters and all their motivations and why they do what they do, especially Big Boss. Big Boss is easily the best character in the entire series, and he's a perfect reminder of how even the greatest war hero, even the greatest heroes can succumb to the darkness. Or as Harvey Dent said in the 1989 Batman movie, you know, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And Big Boss was unfortunately a prime example of that philosophy. So yeah, you know, it's funny. I was only supposed to talk about Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, but to be honest with you, there was a lot on my mind that I had to say about it. That's because with this announcement, it allows me to kind of really get into that Metal Gear mood again. I haven't really experienced this Metal Gear mood since Metal Gear June, which was 3 years ago. That was the marathon that I did during the pandemic. So the fact that Metal Gear is making a comeback makes me all in and excited for what's going to happen. The only reason how come my hopes are not too high, I mean, they're high, but not too high. And the only reason why is because I haven't heard anything about Kojima being involved to make sure that the game is as faithful to the original as much as possible. And considering the fact that Konami has had a terrible reputation, but it seems like the hatred towards Konami isn't as strong as it used to be, but people still don't like Konami because of how they treated Kojima and how they've also treated their workers as well. But there's a lot of people who are excited for a lot of their remakes that they got coming. Like they got Silent Hill on the way. There's a potential new Castlevania game coming out, which I hope that's true. I would definitely be down for Castlevania. Please make it a classic side-scroller. I mean, come on. Like if Capcom can do it with Mega Man 11 and Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection, then you can definitely do it with Castlevania, Konami. Come on. But like I said, not only is Konami bringing back Silent Hill, but now they're bringing back Metal Gear. The only thing they didn't need to bring back is Castlevania. That's like the Konami pillar right there. Oh, and by the way, Konami, bring back Contra. Bring back Contra. Or potentially Suikoden. You know what? I'm giving them so many ideas, but I already know it's not going to work out. The bottom line is, I'm just happy to hear that Konami is working on a new Metal Gear remake, because I think it's a long time coming, and it's very much well deserved. But I do hope that it does turn out as good as I hope it will. I'm just going to be very wary of it for now, only because it's a trust issue with me and Konami, but everybody else I'm pretty sure feels the same way. And the fact that Kojima is not involved in it. So I'm personally am both excited and worried for it, but for the most part, I hope it turns out well. Like, I actually want to believe that this remake is going to satisfy and quench my thirst. But I have to see it. You know what I'm saying? We only got an announcement trailer for the game. We didn't really see it in action. You know what I'm saying? But once we do, only then will I actually decide whether or not, if this is a remake that I'll be playing or not. Okay? So that's pretty much everything I have to say about Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. I am excited for it, as I'm sure as the rest of you are too. Konami, just get it right. That's all I gotta say. This game is just going to be awesome. So anyway, that's all I have to say in this Prelude edition of the Past, Present, Play podcast. So hopefully the pilot will be out very, very soon. And like I said, it's going to be a 2-man podcast. The only reason I'm doing this Prelude is to just let off all these thoughts that were on my chest, and to also give you kind of a good insight on what the podcast is going to be about. So we're going to be talking about like various stuff that's going on in the gaming world, as well as, you know, retrospectives and reviews, hot takes and stuff like that. Like, we're going to just be doing gaming stuff in general and all that stuff, and sharing our different opinions and stuff, and even talking about some of our favorite characters or favorite soundtracks and stuff like that. We're going to be pretty much going into detail on a lot of games, you know what I'm saying? And it's going to be a personal challenge for me, because I've never really done a podcast with another person before on a regular basis. but I think it'll be a new experience that I think is going to make everyone appreciate even more, because I know a lot of people love podcasts where there's two people talking because of how energetic the mood is, you know. It's always fun hearing two people talking about what they love and stuff, especially if it's video game related. But I feel happy knowing that I finally got to tell everyone how I feel about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, as I truly do think that this game is the best Zelda game, and I'll even throw all my cards on the table and say that I'll even go as far as say it's definitely one of the best games I've ever played, or just ever made in general. Tears of the Kingdom is really, really amazing. That's an 11 out of 10 game. Beyond perfect, literally. And as far as Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater is, that's a remake that I was curious to know if it was going to ever happen, because for years it was all hearsay, but Konami finally announced it and straight up said that yes, Metal Gear is returning. And it's a great time to be alive. Like, we're in a renaissance where we have new Resident Evil games, like especially a perfect remake at that. I got to experience, not only just a new, Resident Evil game, but also a new Zelda game. And now in the future, I'm going to get to experience a new Metal Gear game. Like, what a time to be alive. It's amazing to me. And Snake Eater, as far as I'm concerned, I hope this game gives me everything that I want. I will definitely play this when it comes out on the PS5, and hopefully by then I'll actually have it. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening in, and I will see you guys next time on the Past, Present, Play podcast. You guys take good care.